All right, I wanted to welcome everybody to the Agile at Scale SIG for July 2023. Quick apologies on the issue that we had with the passcode. We'll make sure that that's all squared away for next month. We'll dig in and figure out what happened there. But just briefly, before we get to our presentation today, for those who are joining from wherever. I'm sure there's folks out there outside of Austin who, and Ken is outside of Austin as well. So happy to have you on board. Agile Austin, we are a 501c6 nonprofit that is based in Austin, Texas, but especially during the pandemic, we have gotten a lot more folks joining from outside of the Austin area. We've got a really vibrant community here in Austin, and we've started to do hybrid events for some of our special interest groups, and we'll have more updates on those in the coming months, but still a lot of virtual stuff for those that are joining outside of Austin. Our 20, actually I should update this, it's 2023, 2024 board members. We just had Lee Allison join us. All of the folks are continuing their terms that are not named Lee. So Angela, myself, Scott, and Max. So you can always reach out to any of us, board at agileaustin.org, and we're happy to take on any of your requests for various things. We also wanted to thank our sponsors for today's program, so it's free to all. Our platinum sponsor Perspectives, Ad Meliora Coaching, Well Sky 321 Gang. Just really happy to have them on board, and we will have more information for those folks here in the chat in a little bit in terms of how you can get in touch with them. Sponsorship. So if you want to become a sponsor, contact at agileaustin.org. We have SIGs throughout the year, social media posts we do, and campaigns that we run with our sponsors. A lot of different ways that we get your word out about how awesome your organization is for sponsoring us. We also have other meetups or special interest groups, Agile Coaching SIG, this one, our book club, which meets multiple times over the course of a few months to discuss various books. So they'll be discussing another book coming up here next month. And then the Leaders SIG, I think I see Max there, who's joining us virtually outside of Austin today. And we also have Lean Kanban SIG, Scrum Master SIG, and looking to start up a product SIG here pretty soon. So if you have an interest or passion in that, drop a message in the chat to us, and we'll be happy to connect you with the person who's hopefully going to be starting that up soon. And Leland should be joining us as well today. He started this in 2016, so happy 7 years to him and 3 years for me. Really enjoying it and all the presentations we have. Upcoming, well, in August, we will have Lee Allison, who's formulating a topic for us. So we'll see that posted before the end of the month. In September, a relatively long title here, Optimize Flow of Your Development Value Stream by Applying Advanced Value Stream Mapping Techniques, Peter Vellmer. Looking forward to that. And if you would like to present, feel free to reach out to me or Leland. Our email addresses are at the end of this presentation. We still have a slot for this coming October. For today, Ken France, Science of Large-Scale Organizational Change. He'll be talking to us about that. So we're really excited to hear from him. And again, Leland Newsom at agileaustin.org, Ben Rogers at agileaustin.org with a period in between first and last names. Happy to talk to you about any topic and chat with us if you have anything that you'd like to bring up in the SIG in the future. So without further ado, I am going to hand it over to Ken. I'm going to stop sharing and take it away, Ken.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it. Let me share mine just to make sure it looks okay for everyone. Looks good?
It's great.
All right. Ken France. I work for C Prime. I run our Agility Center of Excellence here. my bio that was up there for a second a minute ago. My history is I came out of the development ranks. I was a developer on large scale air traffic control systems, kind of lived through some of the pain of building large scale systems and moving to a more incremental way to build those. I then worked for Rational Software for 9 years. If any of you know Rational back in the day before they got acquired by IBM. So worked there for a long time, and then eventually ended up forming my own consulting company, Blue Agility, back in 2012. That got acquired by C Prime in 2017. So that's kind of been my journey to through my career, starting out in development and then into the coaching space, really helping organizations, implement large scale agile incremental development processes. Well, the title of my talk isn't quite as long as Peter's, coming up, so I'm not sure if it's as good as his. But what I'm really going to focus on today is the people side of a large organizational change, and the science there is not chemistry science; it's people science. And so that's really what we're going to talk about: is how do you engage people's hearts and minds and really get them to be part of the transformation, and recognizing that the social aspect of change is really critical to intentionally focus on. Before I jump into it, I'll try to monitor the chat window with questions, but if I don't see something, please feel free to speak up. And I'd be happy to make this as much of an interactive conversation as we go along the way here. So I'm going to start the talk just with a little bit of context here, and get a sense of people's sort of mental model for change. This graphic just sort of illustrates. It was the image that was used to talk about a study that was done several years ago, where they took around 500 children between the ages of 5 and 13 who were sort of troubled kids. They were in an environment that was not ideal. Ended up people getting into a lot of trouble, sometimes legal trouble, things like that. And they basically wanted to see if these kids' futures would be impacted at all by putting them into a different environment or giving them different opportunities. So they basically took the kids and divided them into two groups. One was the control group that sort of stayed as they were, but they had they had to answer questions from time to time. And then the second group, they got some pretty intense intervention. So they got access to counselors, they got access to support and education, and basically ways to help bring them out of some of the troubled environments that they were in. And so they got a lot of help. And so then what they did, they got this help for a period of time, and then they started monitoring both groups of kids. Who did better over time? Was it the kids that were in the control group, or the kids that were that got the help from the counselors and what have you? And if you could just reply in the chat window, I'm just curious what people might think. So of the kids that got the actual support, what percentage of those kids do you think actually had better future outcomes than the kids in the control group? What percentage of effectiveness, I guess, of the study do you think they would have gotten? 70%, 90, 101, 20, 80, 10. Tristan nailed it. So they actually found that there were actually no discernible advantage to the kids that got the help than those that were in the control group. Very surprising, right? Why, if they got all this help, why did they not do better going forward? And it turns out, as they sort of looked at some of the root causes of that, there were several factors, but one of the big ones was that, they got the support and help for some period of time, but really at the end of the day, they didn't change. It's not like they took them out of their troubled environment. They were still in that same environment. And once the people no longer had the support, once the kids no longer had that support, then they were all of a sudden back to their old ways. In fact, some of them even experienced more problems because they kind of had, at some sense, the hope that their lives were going to be different. And then when they were kind of thrust back into the same environment, they kind of were a little bit disillusioned, and they didn't really have the ways to kind of bootstrap themselves and move forward. So I can put the published paper reference out there. I don't have it handy right now. But basically that's what they found. And so what this suggests is, in their study, is that when you're talking about changing the outcomes that you want to get somebody over a long period of time, it's really important to make the change systemic. Make it so that they're not on their own after some short period of transformation. So if you think about what sometimes happens when we go in and try to transform an organization to Agile, is there's coaches, there's support for some period of time, and then at some point those coaches go away and the organization is left on its own to sustain and to continue to grow and prosper from there. And so the idea is that we want to try to make this change sustainable, and we want to make it stick. So we want to find a way to really bring more and more people in the environment into the change, and help make sure it's ingrained with them, so that long term they make it stick. Oh, I forgot a very important of my my talk, and not to mention my personal brand as I went into this, is whenever I do a talk, I tend to like to pepper dad jokes throughout the talk, just so that if the talk is really bad, you at least like my dad jokes, or at least you can groan at the dad jokes. So let me correct my mistake, and that I wanted to start off with one. And I'm also making it interesting for me. So because this has become part of my brand, some people that I work with got me a little dad jokes set of cards. And so I haven't looked through them all. And so I'm going to get surprised with the dad jokes, just as you will. So I'm just going to flip cards from time to time and read the joke that's on there. So the first one is, I knew I shouldn't have had the seafood. I'm feeling a little eel. Not a good start. Not a good start. But hopefully it'll get better as I go. So that's the concept we're trying to capture here, is how do we make this change sustainable? How many of you work in an organization that looks similar to this? Probably a lot of folks, right? Seeing some hands. Well, is this really a picture showing how organizations operate? Is this how you operate, that the people here just interact with people down here and the people here? Sometimes that's the case, right? We work in really hard silos, but more than likely, our interaction model looks more like this. And you could probably argue that the CEO is not in the middle. The CEO probably might be sitting out here, talking with the execs, out in the left there, talking to execs, et cetera. But this connected model, where people across the organization have connection points really across the org, is really what's common out there. Is that you've got lots of different touch points, lots of different interactions. Dunbar's number, you've probably heard of that. It suggests how many people we can really maintain good social interactions with. And so that becomes a big part of this, that you can't have a meaningful interaction with every person in a large enterprise, but you can certainly start to figure out who are the connections you need to have interactions with, and how do you interact with those folks in the right way, and more. All right, next dad joke. I used to hate facial hair, but then it grew on me. All right. Good, Rika. I see you like my dad jokes. Thanks, Jeff. Social physics. Thanks, Nicholas. Appreciate it. Alex Pentland wrote a book called Social Physics. What this book really focuses on overall is how social networks make us smarter. It really talks about leveraging edit out the dad jokes, large organizations and how the social interaction is a key part of learning and how people learn from each other. So social physics really focuses on that. So going back to the diagram a minute ago, right, you've got all these different text touch points. Well, how do you interact across those boundaries? So maybe these boxes, indicate your team, or, if you're using any kind of team of teams construct, SAFe or else, you may have, a small group that you interact with on a regular basis, but then you also have times where you need to interact outside of that. So how do you do that? Well, Alex's book talks about a couple of key concepts. One's called the concept of exploration, where you're basically trying to use social learning to have group interaction and people bring new ideas into that work group. I've had success doing this. How can we start to get success doing that elsewhere? So this exploration concept is the way that social groups come together and start to interact and learn from each other. Then you have the concept of engagement that he talked about. Engagement is, how do those groups then make decisions to change something? So yeah, we've gotten a lot of learnings and we have a few ways that we could do things, but then how do we as a group decide that we're going to change to do something differently? And so it talks about the importance of, once those groups come together with these ideas, how can that group then proactively make decisions that they can then turn into habits that that group follows? And it turns out that you don't necessarily have to have 100% consensus there, that if you can actually bring a group together, make some conscious decisions to work a different way, if the majority agrees to it, the rest will follow. The rest will say, yes, I'm going to go with the majority. Everybody seems to want to work this way. So let's move into that new working model, and everybody kind of goes along. But that skill set of working in a collaborative way to then, as a group, decide to change and move forward, that's often a difficult thing, right? What are some of the challenges that might happen in that dynamic? Can anybody think about their own context? Like, what kind of challenges might you see with a group of people sort of autonomously deciding to work different? You can either, come off mute or type in the chat. What are some of the challenges you've seen with that approach?
They're not coordinating, and so there's a lot of repetition of stuff that's already been done, or gaps where pieces that are needed aren't finished.
Yep, for sure. Lack of alignment to overall vision, different timelines, resistance towards other ways of working and not listening to new ideas, right? Change is scary. Yeah, sometimes if you have the dynamic of some individuals in that group that are overbearing, or it's kind of, I'm the smartest one in the room, I know what the right way to work is, the rest of you folks should just follow me. That's probably not going to go over too well. So some of the skill sets that are most desired, Bell Labs talks about the way that they recognize and promote good performance are the people that exhibit those skills of bringing a group together, helping to use that social interaction to then drive consensus and form a new way of working going forward. So folks that exhibit those skill sets are highly valued, and really are the ones that they look to try to hire and cultivate, because you're not going to drive change down through top-down command and control. You're going to have to engage the hearts and minds of people out there and try to have people that can work within those work groups and start to move things forward. So a couple tips there. One thing that you find is very helpful, that I've found that's very helpful, is that many times when folks are interacting with their peers, it's sometimes in too formal of environments. We have meetings, we have Agile ceremonies, we have formal ceremonies that you work within. Trying to find ways to do some of this collaboration and interaction informally is very valuable too. So finding ways to take coffee breaks as a team as opposed to individuals, having, social interaction during that time, as well as then brainstorming some of these ways of working. Just finding ways to interact in a more informal way that not only serves to allow you to talk about the work, but talk about each other as people and help move them along. So that's just one way that I found to be very valuable. Let me just pause. Are there any other thoughts or comments people have, or experiences that you've had that can help bring people together in this kind of way that we're talking about, in an informal way, or to help large groups make autonomous decisions?
Yeah. Hey, Ken. Having people see each other as humans, as full humans, and not just as co-workers. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, but that's something that seems to help.
100%. Like, telling dad jokes to each other. I mean, what could be more bonding than that? Yes, food at events, potluck. 100%. Yeah, David, I love that quote, because collaboration is the only way to solve the world's biggest problems. So when we're talking about large scale change, whoops, sorry, dad joke. What do prisoners use to call each other? Cell phones, of course. I like being surprised by the dad jokes too. It's good. I'll tell my dad's dad joke at the end to finish up, so you have that to look forward to as incentive to stay till the end of the talk. When you're talking about change that happens in an organization, let's say we're talking about an agile transformation, what sometimes tends to happen? Well, sometimes we could tend to stay at the team level. That, it's sort of a low-hanging fruit. It's easy to catch, gather hearts and minds at the team level. Smaller teams, sometimes less politics to deal with. It's helpful to, get teams going. What happens as you start to move up into the higher levels, middle management, senior management? Well, sometimes you might get a phenomenon where, senior management gets excited. Hey, we want all the benefits we hear about, being agile and agility. Let's do this. Let's fund this, let's get training, let's get education, etc. Middle management then might come in and say, whoa, let's slow down here. Why can't we, why do we have to do this? This is affecting my sphere of influence. What's this autonomy stuff? What's this self-managing, self-organized team stuff? These folks work for me. And so you can start to get into, and don't take that change curve literally. It's really just meant to say that the way change happens at the higher levels in an organization many times looks very different, and you run into a lot bigger impediments and challenges than you were at the team level. So how do we do this? How do we handle that frozen middle? How do we handle senior leaders wanting everybody else to change, but not them? So one way to think about this is when we develop software, we talk about user stories. There's always this concept of, hey, let's implement a vertical slice of functionality of our user stories that goes from the user interface, down to, through the middleware, down through the database and back up. So a vertical slice of functionality that delivers incremental value. Well, what if we applied that same concept to the way we transformed an organization? So rather than saying we're going to do everyone at the team level first, then try to go to the middle level, then try to transform executives. What if we got this concept of a vertical slice through your organization and said, let's try to transform part of our organization, but let's do it a vertical slice at a time, meaning getting some senior leaders, some middle leaders, some at the team level, all coming together to drive towards a new way of working. Working together as described previously to let's figure out what a new way of working, what are some of the challenges we have today? What can we try as an experiment to move forward in a different way, and engage all levels? So maybe we're working around a certain value stream. maybe we're working around a certain product line, some kind of common thread that connects the senior leaders down through middle management, down to the practitioners doing the work, and really try to find a way to bring the vertical slice of the organization forward, to hopefully, help to understand, help the middle management to understand, they're not losing their influence, that they're just operating differently. Senior leaders realizing they need to change too. And so if we can pick the right vertical slice, get some learnings, have some of the successes, hopefully that vertical slice is having, it can start to permeate then throughout the organization a little bit. And then maybe as you look at, the change curve that typically happens with any kind of change, you start implementing one vertical slice, then another vertical slice, then another vertical slice. And at some point, you start to have this phenomenon where you might have been pushing the change early on to try to get some momentum. And now after you start to have individual slices of success, it's going to start to migrate more towards a pull model where people are hungry for the change. They've heard about it. They've seen the successes. They want more and more. So it becomes more and more of a pull. One example of this, it's actually from way back when I was at Rational Software. At some point, I became, after having worked out in the consulting field organization for a while, Rational itself was going through a big change of moving towards the $1 billion mark as a company. And in order to do that, we needed a better, internal CRM system to manage our customer relationships, to manage the way we did, Rational was a software company, so the way we did licensing renewals and a lot of how we operated. And so they asked me to be the business owner. That was kind of the liaison between the team actually doing the implementation and the field who would be using it. And so as we started down that change, I made a mistake, right? Rather than trying to do that vertical slice, I tried to do a big bang approach and I tried to go too broad and do too much at once and try to impact the whole organization. And one of the, and for a CRM system, telesales, people are often a key, power user of that. So one day a telesales rep reached out to me and, sent me an email, I should say, and not only just to me, but to the whole organization. Basically, it was a flaming email saying, I can't believe you rolled this out. You don't even know what we do, on and on and on. And so he was very upset. So I flew to Boulder, where he was located, sat down with him and understood really where he was coming from. And he helped me understand that while, fundamentally the direction we were heading was the right one, there were just some usability aspects of the system that didn't meet, the needs there. So we were able to quickly talk about that, come up with an approach to that, implemented that, and then rather than trying to roll it out to everybody, we rolled it out with just a few telesales reps and their leadership, including himself. So we basically moved towards that vertical slice model. Did it on a small scale. So two things happened in that. One is we learned. So obviously I learned big bang is not good. I think we all know that at this point. But the other thing I learned was that he and I didn't know each other. But me sitting down with him, and we actually, we even went out, as was suggested earlier, we went out and had dinner together, had a couple margaritas, really just, got to know each other as people. And through that interaction, we now had a social bond. That social bond then translated into, and the changes we made to the system, all of a sudden, instead of being a detractor, he became my biggest champion. He knew that I cared about the outcomes we were trying to get. He knew that I was open to feedback and wanting to do things a different way. And as we had success in that one vertical slice, we then, as this chart implies, continued to then systematically make our way, through the rest of the organization. And it ultimately ended up being, for those of you who have ever used Siebel before, that was the tool we used for CRM. It became one of the most successful Siebel implementations that were on the market at that time. And then to me, it really came down to that social connection that he and I were able to have. So that led to then, continuing to do that throughout the organization. Let me pause there. Any comments or any other experience that folks want to share from their context or questions before I continue? Coincidentally, that person ended up working at 321 Gang, one of your sponsors. So it's a small world, the Rational Network. Yeah, I do believe, Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, the recording from this is going to be sent out to everybody, right? That was asked earlier.
Yes, it'll be posted to our
Great.
YouTube channel by early next week.
Great. Second book reference, Matthew Lieberman's Social. But first, why did the Scarecrow win an award? Because he was outstanding in the field. So, social, our brains are wired to connect. We've talked about this concept already. We want to connect with each other. We crave that. We're very influenced by those connections. You hear a lot of times about people that have had lifelong connections, married couples that as they age, you see many examples when one of the spouses passes away, the other does, very soon thereafter. So the power of these social connections, when broken, can actually cause you physical pain. That can actually cause pain that leads to other things that happen. Another story is just to show how sometimes connections or social interactions can heavily influence you. Some of you may have heard this story of back in 1984 when Reagan and Mondale were going to be running for president. They were in a debate for the nomination, and at the time there was concern over Reagan's age and whether he was mentally fit for the job. There had been some discussions and some concerns in the media about that. So during the debate, at one point in time, that question came up about his age and could he still be the president? And Mondale later said that this moment was the moment he lost the election. He said, basically, what Reagan said was, when asked the question, he's like, I knew that question was going to come up, and I've made a conscious decision that I will not exploit my opponent's youth and inexperience in order to benefit my own nomination or my own presidency. And the crowd erupted with laughter, right? That, the way he delivered it and, the way he turned that question around, Mondale said, at that moment, I knew I lost, because he won the hearts and minds of people over. And the other interesting thing is that they did a study afterwards, and they actually had people that hadn't seen that watch the debate, one with exactly as it happened with the crowd reaction, and one, they took out the crowd reaction, the laughter that happened after it. And the folks that watched it without the crowd reaction thought that Mondale won the debate. So it was the way the crowd reacted to Reagan's comment that influenced a lot of the people. It's like, wow, this guy, really does have the mental acuity to be president. And, just because everybody else reacted so positively to it, that won other people over as well. So just an interesting one that shows that that kind of interaction can, that kind of social interaction can really have a big influence. All right, in the chat window, the brain, how much of the body's weight does the brain represent percentage-wise? Of these numbers here, how heavy is your brain percentage-wise of the numbers shown here? 9%, 9%, 2. The answer is 2. Brain is 2% approximately of the body's weight. How much of the body's energy does the brain consume? Same numbers. 20, 20, 25. 20% is the answer. Approximately 20% of the body's energy the brain consumes. So as we think about pain that we experience, right? What part of the body determines, pain? The brain, right? All the nerves, feed into the brain, and the brain senses, wow, my hand's touching something hot. I should probably move it. So if you think about how do we experience pain and what causes us to experience pain and what do we do about it? So if you had a headache, what might you do to treat a headache? Well, I'll take 2 aspirin and I'll let you know how I feel in the morning. What if you sprained your ankle? Well, I might take two aspirin a day for a week and then tell you how I'm feeling. So what if you just broke up with a spouse or a longtime companion? What kind of pain what might you do to treat that kind of pain? Well, the strange part is what the studies in this book talk about is that kind of social or emotional pain can actually feel just like physical pain. Ice cream, that's a good one. Can actually feel like physical pain. I mean, how do people describe it sometimes? They describe it as a broken heart. And people feeling, almost physical pain because of the sadness they're feeling. And the strange part is that studies actually show that sometimes, like me saying take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning, that you could actually take medication that would normally be used to treat physical pain to treat mental or emotional pain as well. That same 2 aspirin a day, maybe it'll take a month or 2 months, but that could actually, because it manifests itself in similar ways, your heart rate increases, you feel physical pain. So it's basically saying that we experience physical and emotional, or in this case, social pain in similar ways. So if you're called out in public in a work setting, if you feel betrayed by a coworker or a team member who you thought you had trust with, these are all things in a work setting that can react negatively to us because it because it affects us physically. And so to your point, keep busy, don't mope, what you're saying there, Paul. That's, when you think about it, where does your brain go when you're not engaged in a task, right? You're oftentimes thinking about those things. You're thinking about, oh, I really wish I could talk to my friend so-and-so to talk about this challenge I'm having or this problem or my breakup. Who's the first person you call if you have a breakup? Those things. So our brain immediately goes to, one way to solve some of these problems is I'm going to go to social interaction or social connection. And many times our brain's even working hard, that 20% of the brain energy, it's working hard to interpret what people are saying with their social cues. We oftentimes read into people's body language. We read into looks on their faces. I read into the eye rolls that many of you had when I told my dad joke as a way to say how much you loved it. I could tell. But obviously, facial expressions, social interactions, they say a lot. So before I head into this next one, why couldn't the bicycle stand up by itself? It was too tired. All right. Scarf model. The scarf model is a way to sort of look at social interaction in a few different dimensions and really come up with ways to move away from a response where you see a threat and move towards a mode where you see a reward response. And so SCAR stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Status, relatedness, and fairness are the ones that are most tied to social, the social interaction that comes with that. And what you're really trying to do is explicitly brainstorm and try to move away from things that feel threatening, and move towards something that feels like a reward. Autonomy and certainty are less focused on the social interactions, but those other three are. One example of this, just about people's desire to be socially connected and move to a reward system. There was an organization, if you ever worked in as part of a sales organization, there's oftentimes a concept of a President's Cup or an award trip, where if you hit your quota or if you hit a certain number, you get to go on the President's Cup trip. And what they found is that many times the individuals, they craved the recognition that came with, and the social interaction and bonding that came with making the President's Cup, more so than the financial aspects of it. In fact, the way that some of the study saw is that some people, from a financial income perspective, they would have actually done better financially if they would have delayed some deals to make them larger and more lucrative, as opposed to trying to make it smaller and close it in time to hit the President's Cup, even though they probably wouldn't make as much money on it. That they made decisions that seemed counterintuitive to money in their pocket in order to get the recognition and social interaction that came with making the President's Cup. So that concept of, that reward response that they got from achieving something was more valuable to them than the financial benefit they might have gotten otherwise. Okay, so that's just one example. So what we really try to do is we try to move towards things that get us status, that get us recognition. We do a silly thing here at C Prime that was started by our EMEA colleagues who came from a company called RadTech that we acquired, if you've heard of them. They had what was called the RadTech Awards, where they would just, hand out awards that were kind of silly, made up awards. Who was the best dressed, who was, the best teammate, things like that. But they would have a big ceremony and they would get a plaque and they would get everything. And so just that recognition of something, silly like that was very valuable to them, and it brought them together, socially. The connection aspect. I think it was mentioned earlier, that getting to know people as people was so important. That's also very true in terms of having connection, greater connection with groups of people. We do something here at C Prime called the root cause that, came out a few years later when the Black Lives Matter movement and everything came out, and really found that there's a lot of groups that are marginalized in general. And so we started an internal group so that people could come together, have a voice, feel like they were part of a larger community. And that root cause concept has been, huge for the company, not only for people associated to connect, but to bring awareness and empathy for people outside of the immediate group that was coming together. So these are just all examples of things we can do to build connectedness between each other, and to make sure we're really thinking about the social aspect of this. The last aspect of that is fairness. That people, even though they may not like a decision, if they understand why it was made and they feel like it was a fair and equitable decision where different points of view were considered, then they're okay with it. They can wrap their head around it. So having an organization that's transparent and willing to talk to the organization about why decisions were made, why we're moving in the direction we're moving, et cetera, all very important. Comments, thoughts, questions on this SCARF model? Has anybody used this before?
In college, I used to work at a call center, and our manager would do these for us, and she'd get to know us as a way of facilitating it. The first time we had no idea why. She was asking us about what we were doing after school or after work. And then all of a sudden she's incorporated all these individual pieces about us into these awards. It was kind of a twofer. You were getting an award, but it was also a realization that she knew who you were.
Yeah, very cool.
Ken, there was some famous piece of research from decades ago. I won't go into great detail, but what it revealed was that if you measure people's performance and publish goals, their performance will increase. And then if you add a financial incentive on top of that, you get like an almost non-noticeable increase in improvement. So it's just that measuring and publishing that that gets the productivity improvement.
100%. Yep. So great, thanks for that. So this SCARF model is, there's templates and there's a process to follow to go through this. So it's sort of a systematic brainstorm on how to, improve, social connections in each of these areas. And so in summary, before I summarize, I'm reading a book on the history of glue. I can't put it down. So this concept, for those of you that have worked in and around the Scaled Agile framework, there is the concept that SAFe talks about where you have the right-hand side, which is that functional hierarchy that I showed you earlier. How are you organized? What are your departments? There's certainly value in that side of it, and there's a certain set of social interactions that need to happen there. The left-hand side is where that really aligns to the diagrams I showed earlier, where you have all those dots of interactions, right? How are people working together cross-functionally to come together? It's sometimes a little bit easier inside a single, functional department to have close connections. It's harder on the left-hand side where you're working across reporting structures, across silos in often case. So that's where you have to be more intentional and more focused on making sure you're finding ways to connect with each other. So both sides, are important to connect. The left-hand side tends to be a little bit more difficult because of the distributed nature of it. Before I go into any final comments and questions, I'm going to tell my dad's dad joke. So a guy unfortunately got arrested, got put in jail. He was in jail for his first day. This is a longer dad joke than just the quick one. Put in the jail for the first day and just sitting there, and somebody yells 8, and everybody starts laughing. And he seems kind of confused, not sure what's happening. Then somebody yells 11, and people are rolling on the floor. So he's like, what is going on? So he asked the guy next to him, he's like, what's happening? He's like, well, when you've been in here for a while, like some of these guys, you've kind of heard the same jokes over and over again. So rather than telling the joke, we just give them numbers and you just say the number and people know what joke you're talking about and they laugh. He's like, oh, I get it. He's like, I'm going to try this. So he yells 14. Dead silence. Nobody's laughing at all. And he goes to the guy. He's like, what's the problem? He's like, hey, some guys can tell them, some guys can't. All right. On that, I'm going to end for final comments, questions, anything anybody would like to talk about.
I'm kind of curious about, development organizations and being populated in many cases by introverts or people that lean more towards that portion of the extrovert introvert spectrum. What's your best advice for engaging with people that are maybe they like to collaborate, but it can exhaust them?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. So for me, what I've seen in that scenario is, you can't just try to push them. Like everybody's rocket fuel is a little bit different. So you can't say, hey, we're going on, this team outing or this team coffee break, like I mentioned. No, it's required that everybody come, So I think the best way to handle that is, one, ask them what works for them the best. Give them the comfort level to say no if they've reached their collaboration limit for the day, right? And allow them to, sometimes they need that quiet time by themselves to recharge their battery, et cetera. So I really think it's a recognition that everybody's different in that regard, and you can't just force everybody into the same model, but respect them enough to ask what works for them or doesn't work for them and give them the right to say no.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks.
Hmm.
I did take a look back through the chat. I think there was an ask for that for at the very beginning of the presentation. If you have a link to that paper, we'd be
Yep.
happy to post that.
Yep. I will send that to you so you can include it in the notes.
Excellent. Thanks.
Mhm.
What other questions do folks have for Ken?
Ken, when you talked about the vertical slice, to me, what came to mind was doing pilots, right? So I've coached teams in agile transformations. We always start with a pilot. And when you said, we all know Big Bang's a bad idea, right? I'm just curious if you have any stories about, something about a pilot or something about, getting somebody to resist the temptation to try to go Big Bang after they'd piloted something, once or twice. That ring any bells?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the best story. So I guess everybody, to your point, like when I said you don't want to go Big Bang, everybody always nods their head and say, yes, you're right. And so sometimes though, they'll say, they'll go right to the team level. Great, let's just pilot on these two teams in a small case. So I think what I really look to impress upon them is the importance of, look, we're not just piloting a new way of working at a team level. We're piloting a new way of working that also includes middle management and senior management. So we need the pilot to include that whole vertical slice, not just the bottom portion of the vertical slice. And so really impressing upon them the behavioral change that's going to be required at all levels to be successful. And we don't want to Big Bang any part of that, which means we've got to get engagement across all three of those levels for this pilot, and really stressing that importance of it. And the way you pilot and enable the senior leaders is going to look different than the way you empower and enable the team level. But the fact that all of them need to be involved in that, I think, is really where I highlight that. And so
Thank you, Ken.
I think that where I've had success in doing that is trying to, find the initial vertical slice where you've got some willing people at all of those levels that will engage in that. So that's what I really try to look for.
All right, thank you.
Max.
Hey, Ken, thanks. Great presentation. It might not be a short answer, but let's try. In a lot of agile transformations, I've tried to get people to focus on delivering value, right? Like, yes, we can talk about, there's all these reports about story points and burn down charts and everything, and people just go crazy with all the metrics. I'm like, how about something to measure delivering value? What is the value that we deliver? And people stare at me as if I'm speaking a different language or I have two heads or whatever the case may be. Like, how do you have any pointers on that, right? As you're doing these large transformations, to have people focus on something that actually is going to help the company, the business department, or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's a good question, because the term value can be interpreted many different ways, right?
Yeah, awesome.
And some people say, well, delivering software is valuable, so we just have to release more often, right?
Customer value. I'm sorry.
Yes, exactly.
Customer value.
Yes.
Sorry, my apologies. Yeah.
100%. So that's what I really do is I really look to engage, so let's say we're talking even in the context of this vertical slice concept, right? Talk to those senior leaders and, let's truly work together to define, what do we mean by value? What kind of true business outcomes would we deem as a success if we were able to achieve out of it? And obviously we can't be too aggressive in just that one vertical slice, because we're only going to have so much to impact to that. But is there, depending on what kind of business you are, is there some kind of customer facing metric that we can measure? And a lot of times, I've seen a lot of organizations say, well, we should measure an increase in our net promoter score. I'm like, great, what is your current net promoter score? Well, we don't measure it today. Well, okay, that would be a good place to start. Let's start measuring the baseline. So I think just having an explicit conversation, do some brainstorming about, what do we mean by value here, and what's a reasonable incremental value that we could achieve, in a reasonable time frame that would give us incentive to continue down the path.
Shameless plug.
Thank you.
We're
All
reading
right, Ned.
we're reading the book on OKRs in the Agile Austin Book Club right now. Y'all ought to come.
This one?
No,
No. Oh, well, there's lots of good ones out there.
I'll have to shake it out because my brain failed. But
All right, good shameless plug.
it's in the meetup.
There you go. Thanks.
Okay.
All right, we're about at the time box, but anything else?
Well, Ken, I just wanted to say thank you for joining us today. And I wanted to give you space to, any last second things you want to leave us with, contact information, anything else that you want to share. But again, thank you very much for this excellent presentation. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Well, obviously I'm on LinkedIn, Ken France, and also ken.france@cprime.com. Pretty easy if you want to reach me. And yeah, I guess what I would impress upon you all, it's so easy to get, caught up in the mechanics of Agile and even OKRs, all of the different mechanisms out there. But at the heart of it, think about people, and the time you invest in connecting with people is the best time you can invest. So I'll just leave you with that.
All right. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you, Ken.
My pleasure. Thanks for joining, everyone. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Everyone take care. Have a good rest of your day and a fantastic weekend. Stay cool out there.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.